Hello everyone. So today we are going to discuss another question of BPSC mains, and the question is, highlight the key provisions of Bihar startup policy. Bihar startup policy. So first thing first, there are important points for introduction. So if we talk about the sector-wise contribution in the GDP or GSDP of Bihar, the contribution of primary sector, primary, secondary and tertiary sector in the GSDP of Bihar is 21% of primary sector, 18% of secondary sector and 60% of tertiary sector on an average. And in case of India, it is 16%, 29% and 55%. Okay, now this shows that in case of Bihar there is industrial backwardness. How that industrial backwardness is reflected? That is reflected by the contribution of secondary sector. For example, in Bihar economy the contribution is roughly 18%. In case of Indian economy the contribution is roughly 29%. So that itself shows that there is industrial backwardness. Now in order to address that, Bihar government has announced this startup policy. Startup policy. Okay, first and foremost thing, since there are not much industries in Bihar, therefore the people will either shift towards primary sector, that is towards agriculture, or they will shift towards tertiary sector, that is service sector. Now the problem with tertiary sector is that it requires huge amount of skill, as it can provide employment to skilled manpower. Therefore most of the population will shift towards agriculture, and that is why there is agricultural dependency, high agricultural dependency in Bihar. Okay, now covering the important objectives of startup policies. Objective of startup policy. First and foremost objective is to create business environment. Business environment. Which means to set up enabling environment in the state so that more and more industries, more and more business can set up in Bihar. That is to encourage investment in Bihar. So this will encourage investment in Bihar, and because of that there will be employment generation. Apart from that, the goal is to provide financial support, financial and institutional support to startups. Institutional support to startups. So these are some of the broader objectives. Of course, this will also boost entrepreneurship in state. So the startup policy was announced in Bihar in order to create a enabling business environment. This business environment will promote more and more investment in the state, and that investment will lead to employment generation. That investment will also provide institutional support and financial support to startup companies. Startup in the sense, these are new companies which required initial support. Okay, this is the broader objective. Now, in order to implement this policy, certain institutions are set up. So there is institutions for startup policy. First and foremost is startup seed fund. Trust. So this seed fund trust has been set up by the state government, that is by the government of Bihar, to provide initial financial support to the startups, and for that purpose a trust has been set up. The fund corpus size is 500 crore rupees. 500 crore rupees. Apart from that, there is a startup monitoring and implementation trust or implementation committee, that is SMIC. So as the name suggests, SMIC is Startup Monitoring and Implementation Committee. So this committee will oversee and implement the provisions of this startup policy. It has been set up under the Director of Industries or under the Principal Secretary, depending on circumstances. Another institution is Startup Support Unit. Startup Support Unit. That means if any startup require any kind of assistance, they can directly contact Startup Support Unit, that is SSU. So it will act as a single point of contact for startups. Point of contact for startups. That means if startups require any kind of assistance, they can directly contact SSU. And in order to oversee the functioning of SSU, there is preliminary scrutiny committee. Scrutiny committee, that is PSC. So this PSC will oversee the role of SSU. So we have discussed 4 institutions. First and foremost is Startup Seed Fund Trust. So that is a trust which has been set up to provide financial assistance. The fund size is 500 crore rupees. Second institution is SMIC, that is Startup Monitoring and Implementation Committee. So that will implement and that will monitor the entire policy. Third institution is related to SSU, that is Startup Support Unit. SSU will focus on single point of contact for startups. That means if any startup company require any financial assistance or any kind of assistance, they can contact SSU. And whether SSU is functioning properly or not, this will be monitored through Preliminary Scrutiny Committee, that is PSC. So these 4 institutions are part of startup policy in Bihar. Next dimension is, what are the key pillars of startup policy. Startup policy. So it is based on 4 pillars. YUVA, YUVA. Y stands for Yes to Startups. That means we are going to encourage, we in the sense the state government will encourage startups, will encourage new business, will encourage new entrepreneurs. So that is Yes to Startups. U stands for Unleash, Regulatory Enabler. Regulatory Enabler. It means the government will facilitate the overall development of startups, will facilitate the overall growth of startups by providing necessary regulatory support in order to boost the growth. So government will act as a facilitator rather than a regulator. Third is V, that is Vibrant Education System. Vibrant Education System. That means the government is focusing on the modern education system in order to ensure better quality of human capital formation. And last is A, that is access to finance. So these are the pillars of startup policy. Pillars of startup policy. Next is how much financial amount will be provided under this So financial support. Financial support. So under this policy, a assistance of 10 lakh rupees, 10 lakh rupees interest free loan will be provided for a duration of 10 years. So two important points, actually three important points. How much amount will be provided? It will be 10 lakh. What will be interest rate? It is going to be interest free. And what will be the duration? It will be 10 years. So this will be given to eligible startup companies. So that was all about the startup policy. We have discussed objective, we have discussed the key provisions. In the next part, we are going to discuss some new questions. Thank you.